So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about hull design on the dinghies. Eric, what do you have to say?
Well, do you want to talk monohulls versus multi-hulls? Or do
No,
you want to talk displacement versus planing?
let's do monohulls displacement versus planing.
Well, I guess almost all of the monohull dinghies that we sail could be planing dinghies in the right conditions. And in the conditions we sail at locally, we usually never reach planing conditions. So they're pretty much all displacement boats. So is nobody going to ask what the difference is between a displacement hull and a planing hull?
Okay, what's the difference between a displacement hull and a planing hull? We should have
Well,
reversed.
a displacement hull is one that can never go faster than its hull speed. If it's always displacing water, then the faster you go, the more water you push up in front of you, until eventually you wind up, your bow wave becomes, the frequency becomes the length of your boat. So you have your bow wave at the bow of your boat, and the next wave crest is at the stern of your boat. And your boat can never climb over that wave. So there's a physical limit on the speed your boat can go while it's in displacement mode. So if you have a displacement hull, or you are have a hull that could plane, but don't have enough power to plane, then it can never exceed its hull speed. And hull speed is simply a function of the length of the boat.
But there's also different shapes of hulls in different classes of boats. Presumably that makes a difference?
Well, let's talk about planing. Now, if your boat has enough power, then it can climb over its bow wave. And at that point, it's not displacing water, it's scooting along on top of the water. Instead of pushing water out of the way, it's running on top, it's planing.
It's sort of true that most planing hulls are flat bottom, right?
Most.
Yeah.
If you look at motorboats, they're designed with relatively flat or V-shaped bottoms because they're intended to get up on plane. If you look at larger boats, like trawlers or larger motorboats, their hulls are deep and round because they're not intended to plane, and they never can get enough power to climb over their bow wave.
But V-shaped bottom motorboats require a lot of power to get up to a plane, usually.
Right, they require a lot of power to climb over their bow wave, and once they do, then they go very quickly. A flat-bottomed boat will require less power to get over its bow wave. So if you look at a Carolina skiff or a Boston whaler or similar boats, they have very shallow hulls.
Yeah, I mean, 40 years ago, I sailed on a fireball, if you know what one of those was. And they were a planing boat.
Yes, that had a very shallow, almost flat hull. And if you, for example, look at the hull on a Wayfarer, you'll see it is, well, it's hard chined. It means it's not smooth. It has a step shape to it. But it's basically a V shape. And if you get enough power, it'll climb over its bow wave and start planing. With a little more power, a Flying Scot will do the same thing. It's kind of round, but still relatively flat on the bottom. So most of our dinghies will plane if you get up near 20 knots of wind. Now that's different than multi-hulls. Multi-hulls don't rely on planing in order to exceed their hull speed. they rely on having hulls that are narrow, very narrow compared to their length. It's called fineness ratio. And with a certain, if your fineness ratio gets high enough, then instead of having to climb over your bow wave, your hull can actually pierce through it. So catamarans and trimarans, well, trimaran will generally have a planing hull in the middle and two amas. Catamarans will generally have wave-piercing hull shapes. Not necessarily what we refer to as a wave-piercing bow, but the length to the width ratio of the hull is such that it will pierce through its bow wave in order to go faster than its hull speed. Now there's some boats like a Lightning, which is a very shallow V with a very flat surface on each one. So a Lightning you can plane in a lot less wind if you heel it over a little bit so that the boat is sitting flat on the chine. So it has a shape like this, and if you're sailing it flat, it's a V. If you heel it over a little bit, then it winds up on the flat part of the chine, and it will climb its bow wave easier.
I guess that's one of the interesting things about dinghy design. What's the advantage of a round hull versus a chined hull? I mean, Lightnings are chined hull, Scots and Thistles are round hulls.
They just have different characteristics. The Thistles and Scots weren't really designed to hop on plane as quickly as possible, so they have a round hull. I'm thinking a round hull might, I'm not sure, I'm guessing that a round hull might have a little less drag than a chined hull.
Well, the usual argument is that if it's chined hull, you lengthen your water line. You lengthen your water line when it's heeled, so your hull speed gets higher.
So the only chimed hulls that we sail are the Lightning and the Wayfarer. Are there any others that we have out there? And Scott, you know what we mean by chime, correct?
Yeah.
And Michelle, on your end, do you know what we mean by chime?
Well, I don't think the Wayfarer is actually a hard chined boat, or is a V-shaped hull. It's a round hull, but it has what we call a hard chine, which is really a lap straight construction. It goes back to when boats were built with overlapping boards.
There's my answer.
But I don't really think the difference in hull shape between a Wayfarer and a Tanzer or a Wayfarer and a Flying Scot make a huge difference. If you look at those boats versus a windmill, you'll see the windmill is a lot narrower for its length. And I think the windmill also has a pretty flat bottom. So the windmill, like a Lightning, is made to pop up on plane more easily.
You compare like the 505 and the 420s, 470s. They have a class above that in planing.
The 505 has a rounded hull, I believe, but it's fairly flat on the bottom. It's probably not as flat on the bottom as a Flying Scot, but the 505 carries a lot more sail area for its length and weight. So it's made to be very powerful in relation. It has a high power to weight ratio. So that helps it plane very quickly.
Eric, you want to speak on a laser getting on a plane?
Well, a laser is a very flat bottom design too. So it could very easily hop up on plane if the wind is up. And they also surf quite a bit. If you see a laser going downwind in a breeze, you'll see them sailing up and down, left and right, all over the place, trying to get up on plane and then trying to surf on the waves. And it may look to you like they're crazy sailing 45 degrees off the wind, heeled the wrong way, and rocking back and forth. But what they're really trying to do is get up onto a wave and surf it, because for all their speed, they're not normally going faster than the waves. So if they can get on a wave and surf, even if they have to sail way off to one side of the course and then catch another wave and sail back, they're still making better VMG surfing.
Can a sunfish do the same or no?
Don't see why not.
I don't see
Sunfish
the
also has a very flat, hard, chined bottom.
right. I don't see the sunfishes sailing like the lasers though.
Do you see them sailing in the same winds as you see the lasers sailing in?
In theory, yes. The sunfishes can sail in much heavier air than we currently sail in.
Yes, a skilled sunfish sailor can sail it in 25 knots and be under complete control. If I tried to take a sunfish out in 25 knots, I'd be capsized almost all the time.
How much is the difference in wind speed from the surface of the water, say 25 feet up? What's the how does the velocity decrease? Is there any physics behind
Yeah, it's logarithmic.
this?
We were measuring the speed we didn't have this weekend, and I was measuring, 3 to 4 knots with my anemometer on the boat at the water. So I actually called out to the sailors and said, "Hey, what are you guys reading at your masthead?" And they came back with 7 and 8, which I took to be their way to communicate to me to start the races, because otherwise they would have stayed quiet if they didn't like what they saw. So it was almost double what I was reading at the water.
No, that's not surprising. You have a boundary layer. It's zero at the water surface and it
Right.
goes up logarithmically.
That was why I asked, because, I've been out with them enough to know that what they have and what I have is different. The reverse goes for the same. I could be reading 12, 15 on my anemometer, and they're reading 25 plus on their masthead, saying, "Why are we out here?"
Yeah, but the 25 knots, 20 knots at the or 7 or 8 knots at the masthead is not driving the boat. It's halfway
Okay,
down.
the difference in wind speed aloft and at the water level varies depending on the absolute speed of the wind.
Right.
At 15 knots or less, roughly, there's usually quite a bit of difference in speed between the water level and what's aloft, because the wind going over the water has friction and it slows the wind down. So you have a gradient where it's slower at the water level, and the higher you get, the faster the wind gets. And that is the primary reason why we put twist in sails. Now, once the wind speed gets up above 15 knots, you can see on the water when you get those ripples on the ripples, when you hit about 15 knots, what actually happens there is the water, you still have the friction of the surface of the water, but you start getting little circles of wind right on the surface. You get a little vortex effect all the way across the surface of the water, which is like ball bearings made out of air. So it greatly reduces the friction level just above the water level. So above 15 knots, you see a lot less difference in velocity between the water level and 20 feet up, or 5 feet up and 20 feet up. So that's why in lighter winds they say twist into your sail, and when the wind gets heavier, take twist out of your sail. Is because the twist, you need the twist because the wind is going different velocities at different altitudes.
So what you're saying is below 15 knots, you got more laminar effect, and above 15 knots, you got more of a turbulent taking over. And that transitions that ball bearing effect you're saying.
Well, it's turbulent at the water level.
Yeah, but it's, yeah.
Just a little bit above the water level and up, there's not that frictional gradient.
Right.
So the wind speeds tend to be more stable, going from 3 feet to 20 feet.
And you take the twist out of the sail by using the outhaul.
There are a number of controls, each of which does multiple things to a sail shape. But the primary way of taking twist out of the sail is to put on the vang or to haul down on the main sheet and let the traveler out a little bit, which both do the same thing. They tighten the leech of the sail.
I don't have a traveler. What do I do then?
Do you have a vang?
Yes.
Pull down on the vang. If you pull down on the vang, it pulls the end of the boom down, which in turn tightens the leech of the sail, which reduces the twist.
Yeah, the way I've heard that, and again, I'm not experienced, but the way I've heard it is in stronger winds, you want a flatter sail. Is that what you're saying? I've heard it because they say in lighter winds, you need more shape to get more action out of the sail, and in stronger winds, you need less drag.
You have to realize what people mean by lighter winds and heavier winds, because the people saying that are usually keelboat sailors. And to them, 5 to 10 is light wind. So in 5 to 10, you have that wind is stronger aloft than it is at the surface, at the water level. So I could draw, you probably won't understand if I try to explain why that translates into needing twist, because it has to do with apparent wind angles. And with different wind velocities, you have different apparent wind angles vertically. So you need to change the angle of attack of your sail to match those different apparent wind vectors. And at the 5 to 10 range, that's probably when those differences are about maximum. And how much twist you need also depends on how fast your boat is, because the faster your boat goes, the greater the effect of your apparent wind is going to be. So boats that are generally slow, so what if the wind is blowing different velocities? Your boat velocity is not really contributing to your apparent wind vector, so twist doesn't make as much of a difference. But there's at the 5 to 10 knot wind speeds is generally when most boats will need to adjust the twist, because that's when you have the maximum variance between your apparent wind at your boom versus the apparent wind at your masthead. Now, when the wind picks up above 15 and the wind velocity evens out across that range, then the difference in direction of your apparent wind is much less. So that's when you want the angle of attack of your sail from top to bottom to be much smaller, a much smaller range. So that's when you take twist out. When your boat starts getting overpowered, now generally on a keel boat, if it's blowing so high that you're getting overpowered, you reef the sail. And that also shortens your sail, so you have much less heeling moment. So that's the best thing to do, is to reef your sail. But if you're on a dinghy and you can't reef your sail, then sometimes you will put some twist back in so that you can spill air off the top of your sail. Oh. And that reduces heeling moment. And you'll see that mostly in high performance boats, sport boats like the 505 and catamarans. In the puffs, instead of easing the sheet in the puff, they will ease the, their response to a puff is to let the boom come up and dump air off the top of the sail, induce twist and dump air off the top, rather than letting the boom out, but keeping your twist the same. I don't know if that makes sense to people or if it's too convoluted an argument.
No, it actually does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We have some isotope pictures where you can just see how twisted that mainsail is. And it just, doesn't look real attractive in terms of the shape. Eric, you want to comment on that? Some of the photos I'm thinking about?
Well, there's a photo of me out on the trapeze where you can see there's a tremendous amount of twist in the mainsail, but that's partly because I'm way trapped out and flying a hull really high, and I'm dumping air for all I can get. So the boom is out and coming up quite a bit. But besides that, the isotope mainsail is designed with about 11% twist in it. So even when you sheet it all the way in and get it on center and pull the leech flat, there's still quite a bit of twist built into the shape of the sail. And that's because the wind range we sail them in, and the speed of the boat, given that it sails very much on its apparent wind, it usually needs a lot of twist in the sail. So that twist, instead of being created by how we trim the sail, it's built right into the shape of the sail. Which we can do because it's a radial design, a radial cut.
Got
This is, well, it's a stupid question, I think, but why wouldn't you want a square sail as opposed to triangular sail
So
in terms of wind? Like, how did we end up with triangular sails, and what's the advantage of them?
So my first comment, the boats back in the 1600s had square sails, and they could not sail upwind because of the sail shape. And so they always had to plan their departures and returns based on the Gulf Stream winds so that the winds were already always behind them. So when I speak to the sailing classes, I speak to the square sails and how they couldn't go upwind. Eric, can you explain the science behind it?
Looks like Peter's going to talk about the trade winds. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, that's actually not true. They could sail upwind, but only at about 80 degrees to the wind.
Okay.
And that's the only way you get around Cape Horn.
Yeah, the square riggers were made for sailing downwind. And you'd see some of them did have triangular jibs on them, triangular head sails. And in fact, you could turn a square rigged sail and tie one of the corners forward. Like you say, you're not going to make much above a beam reach, just barely above a beam reach. If you get into later designs, does everybody here know what a gaff rigged sail is?
Yeah.
I don't have a picture handy. Jolene, you know that picture that's on the wall in the hallway, downstairs hallway? The one that used to be in my bedroom when I was a kid growing up. My grandfather painted the watercolor.
They had pictures then?
They had paintings. Now, a gaff rigged sail is, it has a spar across the head of the sail, across the top of the sail, as well as the boom. So you would hoist the spar up the mast. So your mast would be here, and there would be a spar here, and the boom here. And it was a very large.
So is a sunfish a spar sail?
No, a sunfish is what's called a lateen rig. It's still a triangular sail. But its peak is not at the mast.
Eric, can you allow me to share my desktop?
You have a picture of a lateen rig versus a Marconi rig?
Now I got a gaff rig. Or make me co-host.
I made you co-host before. I'll make you co-host again.
Logged in before I shut down 3 times. Thank you.
Okay, I'm forgetting where the option is to allow everybody to share.
It's on the share.
I think I'm going to find it.
On the very bottom.
So Eric, can you see the gaff rigs that I pulled up?
I see it.
Yes, on that gray picture on the top, that mainsail is a gaff rigged mainsail.
Why
And
don't we
if you
use?
look at that blue and white striped sail that's on the lower to the left, that's a lateen rig.
That looks the same to me.
Well, okay, no, that's still a gaff rig, but
Yeah.
find a
Latina
picture of a
rig
sunfish.
would have its point past the mast.
Right, a lateen rig extends in front of the mast.
Right.
But that part of the sail usually is rather inefficient. So the gaff rig and the lateen rig predate what's known as the Marconi rig, which is what we think of in a traditional triangular shaped mainsail.
Why is it called Marconi?
Because Marconi is the guy who invented radio, or was the guy who invented radio. And it was called a Marconi rig because the standing rigging for a mast for that style rigging looked a lot like his antenna with the guy wires off it.
The things you're going.
But you don't see gaff rigs much anymore because or lateen rigs, except in the small boats like a Sunfish, because the Marconi rig is more efficient. It's actually a better wing shape for the amount of sail area it has.
Yeah, the gaff rigs, if you've ever seen a Thames barge, sailing barge, they use gaff rig. But one of the advantages is you don't need as tall a mast.
Right. And that was that's an advantage when your mast is made out of a tree.
Yeah.
But when you can make an aluminum or carbon fiber mast extrusion, it's basically as tall as you want and still be structurally sound, it becomes a lot easier to make a sail with a higher aspect ratio.
So I've been kayaking a lot on Jordan Lake, and I noticed the middle of that lake it looks like a forest. So that's probably why you guys don't sail up there, right?
In North
which
Carolina,
lake?
the pine trees were used for masts, back in the 19th century.
I mean, I'm up in the middle of Jordan Lake there. You guys don't go about past that point because I found there's lots of old guys still sailing out in the water.
Oh.
Well,
Guys.
Falls Lake and Jordan Lake are both dammed up rivers. They're man-made lakes.
They didn't clear
And
all
on
the.
both of them, they did not clear cut before they dammed it up. So there's a lot of trees sticking up out of the bottom on those two lakes, which is nice for fishing. It's good fish habitat. But when the water gets shallow, you've got a lot of stumps you need to worry about.
Yeah. So I've been up there with
So
my kayak.
there are places on both Falls Lake and on Jordan Lake where you really don't want to sail.
Yeah. So I made a sail for my kayak because I get about 3 miles down the lake and I've been trying to catch the winds back. If I can share my screen, I'll show you my new sail.
You should be able to share it.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Hey man, that's upside down, man.
Cool.
So what I got there is I got this is a variation off a YouTube thing I found, but I tried to put a spreader bar up top like a batten, but it wouldn't work. I had to do everything sitting down. So I came up with this spreader bar right here on my two lines there, and I got a bungee cord right here that connects each side. and it works pretty good. I can get about 2.5 miles an hour on a light wind. I'm just waiting to get some heavy wind, but I could probably get it up to 5 miles an hour,
Cool.
5 knots. But it's only a down. I don't have a keel or a centerboard, so it's only a downwind thing. So I can go up lake and fish, and then when I get a wind, I can just sail, get a sail back to the launch at Farrington. So that's what I'm trying to do. But the wind hasn't been cooperating that much lately. You can see this one. I was down at Harris Lake this weekend, and the wind, we had a little bit of wind, but it pretty much died.
So why did you go with the upside down, the inverted triangle instead of a standard triangle?
It's the whole thing about the velocity of the wind. I'm trying to get more surface area higher up,
Okay.
down below, so I can get more of the stronger wind above me than what's near the surface. There's nothing near the surface. I tried one of those little round sail things, but I get more power out of this thing. And I thought about making this thing probably a little bit wider maybe, but I made this, I want to get about 20, 30 bucks into this thing, ropes and a shower curtain and PVC pipe.
Cool.
That's great.
Excellent. And you're also, because you're going downwind, you're blocking the bottom part of that sail, so it's really not really doing much.
Yeah, probably a little bit. Yeah. So I might dare to try to make it taller or maybe a little bit wider, but I all have for keels that rudder on the back. I'd have to get some kind of pontoons or something to stabilize it from having a breeze tip me over or something.
What I noticed is his hat is orange, his boat is orange, his sail is orange, and his life jacket is close to orange.
Yeah, it's kind of coordinated, right? Well, at least they can see me in the water.
His shoes are black. He failed on the shoes.
Failed on the shoes. But there are boats on that lake that go 100 miles an hour. I mean, those fishing boats get in up there, and you have to watch out for them because, I mean, they must have like 200 horsepower motor on those things. They just fly down that lake. I guess they know where they're going because they're heading right for those trees. I guess they follow a channel.
Steve, let me know, but I've got an old, I actually had a Grumman canoe 40 years ago that had a sail kit with it. And it's got both a mast and the sail with it, but I don't use it anymore. It had lee boards on it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if you want some material for a sail, let me know, and it's yours.
Sure. I'll give it a try. I like experimenting. So that's what I do with my time right now.
So Peter and Eric commented how the Marconi sail was higher performance than the gaff sail. And Wikipedia basically says, how does the Lateen sail work? And spoke to the air pressure on the two sides. And that brings us back to the topic of lift. So the Marconi sail introduces more lift than the square sail, is the way I'm reading the Wikipedia write-up.
That makes sense.
The luff length is longer on a Marconi rig than on a gaff rig or a Lateen rig. So
Yeah,
and that's where most of
on
your lift comes from.
On a gaff rig, it's hard to control that top gaff boom. It'll go with the wind,
And it says the advantages of the Lateen sail, it is effective in lighter winds.
Why is there a difference in terms of a square rig not being able to go upwind as much as opposed to our standard triangular? I guess I'm not conceptualizing that.
We go back to the lift that's taking place and the curve of the wind on the front of the sail versus the curve of the wind on the inside part of the sail.
Well, a square-rigged ship its sails are not really generating lift; they're generating drag, much the same as the sail on your kayak. It's just the wind pressure on the fabric that is the propelling force. It's not the Bernoulli effect of having different wind speeds on each side of the sail.
Yeah, you can only go as fast as the wind downwind.
Right? If you're
So
sailing off drag, you can never go faster than the wind. But if you're sailing off lift, you can.
So it's the pressure differential, basically, is what you're saying, Eric, if I understand.
Well, when you're sailing downwind, let's say on the Tanzer, when we're sailing dead downwind and we've got the main out on one side and the other side we've got either a spinnaker or the jib out on a whisker pole sailing wing on wing. The only force that's driving the boat is the pressure of the wind on the sails. That's pushing the boat. So you can never go faster than the speed of what's pushing you.
And you can't go as fast because you've got drag. So you're always going
Or
to go
you're going to
slower.
go slower because you can never actually make it to the same speed because you have drag of the water. But theoretically, if you were in zero friction, you would still never go faster than the wind. On an isotope going downwind, we don't sail dead downwind. Instead, we sail at an angle, usually approaching 45 degrees off the wind. And instead of sailing based on the wind pressure in the sail, we're sailing on our apparent wind, which is providing driving force through lift, which is the Bernoulli effect of the wind velocity being higher on the leeward side of the sail than on the windward side of the sail. That creates a pressure differential on the two sides of the sails. It is not because of the wind that's pushing you, but it's because of the relative speed difference between the sides of the sails. And when we are sailing off the wind, we start sailing faster, and then our apparent wind shifts, and it builds. So now we have a more efficient sail angle, and our apparent wind is faster. So we go faster, and then our apparent wind shifts more. And then we're in a more efficient point of sail with higher winds, so we go faster, and our apparent wind keeps shifting, and we keep going faster and faster until we reach the point where it maximizes the benefit. And at that point, we are actually sailing faster than the true wind. Now, I'm surprised nobody said, but Eric, if a triangular sail is more efficient, why do you have a square top main on your isotope?
More sail area aloft.
Well, it approximates a wing better. That's an airplane wing better.
Well, we put a batten in the top of the sail to keep the top of the sail from falling over. And we wind up, so that little bit of pointed fabric up at the top of the mast, there's not much sail area there. So it's hard to get an efficient wing shape there. By making it a square top, you've increased the sail area so you get a better shape, more of a better airfoil. And also you've moved your sail area aloft where the wind velocity theoretically is a little higher.
So really, we should have had square sails on Saturday.
Yes, you should have.
I kind of like the Spanish Armada.
Yes, or got some things and added them out there.
Yeah.
I don't recall, but did Wings have a square top mainsail?
I don't know. I mean, we didn't see him. I was on Peregrine, so we were right up the back. We wouldn't see anybody.
You must have seen them while they passed you.
Because
I think they were long gone before we even noticed.
A lot of the modern racing boats that are designed to be racers, dedicated racing machines like the J121. I don't know if the J121 does, but I would not be surprised at all if it had a square top mainsail. Okay,
which that then makes me understand. One of the questions I had, and I was talking to Angela about this earlier this afternoon, was, and I'm kind of veering off here a little bit, so I apologize, but why would somebody in non-spin, like Grand Cru, for example, why would they so far ahead of us in cruisers? And I'm trying to understand when you got what is essentially similar sort of boats. Why were they so far ahead of us?
Well, Jolene, what's the difference in perf rating?
I'm trying to pull it up, but my machine is slow. So,
Well, most cruising boats
I can,
are in the cruising class.
I can answer,
go ahead,
Okay,
Ann.
go ahead, Angela.
I can answer that. Grand Cru, that is a CNC 33 and it's rated 150.
And you guys were,
Wait, what, 170? You said 170?
Well, the J24s are 171. I can't
Oh,
remember
okay,
what
that's better
Peregrine.
then.
I think Peregrine is like over 200 though.
Oh, is there? Oh, okay, okay.
I'm thinking 186, if I remember correctly. I think you were 186 and Andiamo was 222.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Andiamo was over
Okay.
200. That's right.
Is
Oh,
that
Peregrine is
largely
186.
displacement?
Okay.
Is that largely due to displacement?
Yeah, and I can't figure out, well, because we had a reasonably experienced crew. I mean, we're no novices on that boat, and we were up the back, whereas this other boat was, towards the front. And I'm trying to figure out whether it was down to the trim of the sail or what it was that gave them an advantage.
So in light air, the heavier boats in current are at an extreme disadvantage.
Yeah, I've got to say a CNC 35 is not a heavy boat.
Yeah.
Well, it was a 33, but yeah, CNC makes boats with the lower displacement and more sail area. So they have a much higher power to weight ratio.
Okay.
But I will tell you, Todd was complaining during your starting attempts that he wasn't moving either.
I can imagine.
I crewed on a CNC 35 Mark III once in the Ocracoke Regatta several years ago. And it was we were one of the faster boats. We were sailing in non-spin. And it was fortunate for us that we were one of the faster boats because we jumped out to a fairly early lead ahead of the pack. And a huge thunderstorm came up behind us. And it swallowed most of the boats that were behind us, all of the cruising fleet and most of the non-spinnaker fleet. Wow. Everybody that was slower and wasn't able to get that extra mile of distance in the first hour of the race. And the storm never quite caught up with us. And when we put in and took out a reef 3 times in that race.
Wow.
But we looked back and just this huge black rain wall encompassed the fleet behind us. And probably 70% of the boats dropped out of the race because they were just swallowed up by a huge thunderstorm. And they just dropped their sail, started their motors, and turned around and went home. So there is a difference in performance between boats, even though they might look the same to the untrained eye.
Yeah. Okay, Eric, thank you. I mean, I figured it had to be something. I'm a physicist and a chemist, so all of this stuff makes sense to me. And I figured there was probably something other than the skill of the particular crew trimming sails that made such a significant difference under those sort of conditions.
And that's one of the disadvantages, Hillary, of the perf handicap system, is it really doesn't account for the light airs or the really heavy airs. There's just no way to really fairly handicap for it.
Okay. All right, good to know. Thank you.
So
Yep.
on your end, Hillary and Angela, as we started you guys 4 times on Saturday, did you appreciate what we were trying to do, or did you say, what the heck?
No, we appreciate it. I mean, it was just, for us, I think all of us on the boat, it was just funny because, here we were, that we didn't even have enough wind. We couldn't even get over the line.
So to the dinghy sailors, I actually hailed one of the cruiser boats to go ahead and start his motor and get back up to the starting line so we could try again.
Yeah.
Which is, one of the techniques that you can use if you're in a perf boat and you're dealing with light air and no current, is to motor up ahead of the line and then figure out what you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we heard you on the radio tell him to do that. So.
Amo, could you please turn on your motor and get back up here?
Yes. Otherwise, we're going to be here all day.
It was a strange way to start a race because it was a downwind start, but with adverse
Yep.
current. And
Yep.
every
And I
time the
was,
wind would
I
come
was-
up. Go ahead, Angela.
Well, I was going to say what I really thought was amusing is when you finally got us going on the fourth try, we'd move. It took forever just to get across the start line.
Well, the wind kept fluctuating between 1.5 to 2.5 knots. And we'd hit 2.5 knots, and the cruisers then could make headway against the current. So we'd see all of you, okay, now they're all moving towards the line. We're going to go into sequence. We'd go into sequence, and then
Wind drop.
3 or 4 minutes in, the wind would drop back down to 1.5, and you would all start drifting backwards as the current took over. So it would get within a minute of the start and would say, okay, kill it. And then a few minutes later, the wind would pop back up to 2.5, and we'd see you all start moving forward again. We'd say, okay, go back into sequence. And that happened 3 times.
Yeah.
The
That's what we
fourth
thought.
time too, but we just let you go and you made it.
Yeah, and that's what we thought was funny. I mean, we saw exactly that, Eric, is that every time you said go, the wind kind of knew and we would just like drop.
And the fourth time, they were still all moving. The wind stayed up close to 3 the fourth time, and they did continue to move better than before.
But the cruising boats are generally heavier. They generally have more lead in the keel, a higher displacement, and usually carry less sail, because the boats that are in the cruising class are usually the boats that are made for offshore sailing.
Mm-hmm.
So they're built heavier with less sail so they can withstand strong winds.
Okay.
Whereas
Right.
the boats that are sailing in the non-spinnaker division generally are not built for offshore sailing. They're built for nearshore sailing. And so they are lighter, have less displacement, they have taller masts, and they carry more sail.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Now the spinnaker boats usually are the boats that are made for racing. And they have a different hull shape, a much flatter hull. They won't be much displacement boats at all. They will have a fin keel instead of a full keel, so they're much more maneuverable. They will carry a tremendous amount of sail for their weight and have even taller masts and may even have square top sails and probably have a lot more controls for shaping their sails, and they're probably newer.
And then we had Belafonte with us, which was 23 foot. They were in the spinnaker class, and an older boat, and completely not everything Eric just said. And they missed third place by 17 seconds. So they were the last to finish in the spinnaker class, and their handicap actually 17 seconds out of line honors. Eric?
Well, the starting conditions greatly favored the spinnaker boats and the non-spinnaker boats over the cruisers, especially the spinnaker boats, because they could carry their spinnakers to start. So they had twice the sail area, helping them fight off that adverse current.
Right, and that made sense. That made total sense to me. And you know, when I race with Angelo, I'm on the J24. We fly a spinnaker, so I'm really used to flying that spinnaker, and I totally understand how it was that they were able to post the best times on that.
Right after the start, all the spin boats just walked away from everybody else.
Yeah.
But in the middle of the race, when you got out into the ocean and current wasn't a factor anymore, and the winds got really light, you know, well, if nobody's moving, then all that's happening is more time is expiring, and the boats are all just sitting still anyway.
Yeah.
So that in turn favors the higher perforated boats, the cruising boats, because everybody is drifting at the same speed, but you are gaining seconds on them on corrected time. So in the middle of the race, it actually shifted more to favor the heavier boats. I mean, conditions, every boat has their ideal conditions. And if the conditions are right for your boat in that race, chances are you're going to do very well. So there is a certain amount of luck in any handicapping system.
All right.
But besides that, skill also plays a very large part.
Yeah.
Even if your boat is favored, it's not going to do you any good if you don't trim your sails right.
Yeah.
So Scott, we really didn't talk much about the hull shape and why we have different hull shapes. My initial thought is when boats were first being built, they were built out of wood, and wood is flat, which is why we kind of started with chimes. And so I have to think there's some kind of inherent benefit to rounded bottom. But I also think that's probably
No,
a bad bias on my part.
the older boats were built of bent plywood usually, so round bottoms were partially natural to what they wanted.
And if you're talking really old boats, you're talking commercial shipping boats.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and that's maximizing internal volume.
Yeah, I mean, this was
for the amount of materials.
30s or something. So.
Jolene, do you have a picture of full keel versus fin keel? That would be another difference probably between the cruising boats and the non-spins and the spins. Cruising boats are much more likely to have a full-length keel, which provides stability for offshore sailing, but you also have a lot less maneuverability. So
yeah, that was more boats in prior to the 1970s. The late 1970s, 80s, they've got more to the fin keels with a skeg rudder.
No, I said fin as an F-I-N.
yes.
Yeah, that's right, fin. It's a partial keel. It's not a.
It's a fin.
Yeah. Well, it's not the modern ones with the long thin thing with the weight on the bottom. It's more built into the hull. You know?
Well, the newer the design and the more the boat is built for racing, the higher aspect keel it will have.
Right.
And the more the keel will be a lifting keel rather than just an extension of the hull.
Right. Yeah, well, you know, these boats with 6-foot keels, you know, don't work very well around North Carolina. You know, you got too much shallow water.
All right, how about right there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Eric?
I mean, you don't see very many more modern boats built like that top one.
No. But there probably were boats racing that had a keel like that.
Right.
I like that one in the extreme right hand, the second row down, for places with big tide differences, so it'll stand up straight when the tide is out.
Which image, JC?
Extreme right, second row down.
Right here?
No, the one with the blue sky background.
Yeah.
Oh, right there.
Yeah, that one.
He's got two.
Yeah, so when the tide is out, he sits.
I forget that's what's the name of that boat? There's I forget the name of that boat.
That's a Bill's keel yacht. Just two keels.
It actually has two keels at a slight angle to each other. So if you're sailing it in an area with extreme tides and you anchor it, when the tide goes out, it just stays standing up.
Here's another one down here.
Right.
Yeah, the modern version of that is what users call a lifting keel. So a boat called a southerly, you can lift the keel right out of the out into the boat, so it will sit on the bottom with a flat bottom.
I see. So we only have one, but you could lift it up. Okay.
Right.
That first hull you showed with the keel running the length of most of the hull is what a Cape Dory has.
Right there.
And there was supposed to be a Cape Dory Kai, but it took them so long to get up to Hilton Head on Friday, they didn't even start the race. And Hillary and I were actually out on a Cape Dory this afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a 1960s boat, I think.
Yes, very old boat, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So they started to change to the more the fin keel in the late 1970s, sort of Ted Hudd people, and you know, through the 70s and 80s.
And if you look at the in the tabular section on the left there, the third row down on the right, the white hull with the teal, yeah, that one. That's much more like what we see on most modern cruiser racers.
Does that give the boat some lift?
It's a much higher aspect keel, and it has a bulb at the bottom for your ballast.
Ballast?
It's usually a lead bulb or even a wing.
I've seen some of the Delftaville Yard. They look like an airplane wings sticking out. I was just wondering if that would.
I don't think they give it lift.
Well, it is the shape of the keel actually provides lift.
Okay.
So as you are sailing through the water, it actually helps the boat crab to windward or not fall so far to leeward. And because it's just this little pivot point in the center of the boat and the rudder is a little fin way at the transom, they turn on a dime. So they're very maneuverable and they are quick through the water. So that looks almost like a Beneteau, that picture. And if you look, if you look at even more modern designs, the bottom, instead of being a bulb, will be a horizontal fin, a horizontal wing. It's just like the fence, a winglet on an airplane wing.
Right. And that wing actually brings the boat up slightly higher out of the water, right?
No. But what it does is it controls the water flow across the keel. And it keeps water from slipping off the bottom of the keel.
So it reduces drag.
So, well, it makes it perform like a longer keel, but it can be shorter. It makes the keel more efficient.
Okay.
So it provides the same amount of resistance to lateral movement without having to be as long. Okay, if you take a look at the shape of the hull that's there, that's pretty much a planing hull.
It's flat.
It's a flat hull, so that boat would actually plane, even though it's a fairly big boat. It's got a very deep draft, very narrow keel with a great big bulb of lead on the bottom for displacement. And I'm guessing that might actually be a canting keel.
Yeah, Eric, look at down at the bottom. Right there.
Oh, does it say canting keel? It does.
It says canting keel.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm waiting for the question.
They seem to have abandoned canting keels very much, at least for ocean racing. I guess because they fail so many times.
Yeah, look at this broken keel.
Eric,
What the
I'll play
canting
your
keel
game.
does,
It swings from one side to the other.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
No.
now when the advantage of the canting keel is that when the boat starts to heel over, when it heels over, your sail area becomes less efficient because it's not as high up. And now it's heeled over. It's trying to turn you as much as it is propel you forward. With the canting keel, you can actually keel over to the windward side, which then picks the boat back up. So in really high wind, you can still be sailing flat and vertical And with that planing hull, you can still be planing, but your keel is sticking out at an angle to the side. They were all the rage in offshore racing boats, what, a decade ago?
Yeah.
But as Peter said, there were some famous examples of them falling off while people were racing.
That would
Of
not
course,
be
there were
good.
also some famous examples of J109 keels falling off.
Okay, here's a wing keel. So Eric, these are supposed to create lift?
He stepped away from the screen.
Well, we can't get his opinion then, can we?
I've seen some of these really World Cup racing, these modern high class World Cup racing. They got these keels these foils that drop down, and I mean these people really have got the physics figured out. I mean, and all this carbon fiber you can use now, you can really make this stuff lightweight and everything.
There you go.
You know, I mean, it's lots of variations of it.
I'm sorry, that's not a boat. That's an airplane.
I
Flies like an
agree.
airplane.
I agree.
That's not a boat.
Try to understand that, and that will totally confuse your whole dynamics of understand how to sail a dinghy. So
Yeah, right.
it's really going to mess up your head.
I got enough trouble with the way it is. I don't have to worry about front and back.
That's
Balancing front and back.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Let me find out what happened to Eric.
He was abducted by Martians. Oh, he's back.
I'm back.
So we got into the word foil, so I brought up these photos, but before we do those,
You asked if the wing keel provided lift.
here, yeah.
As I understand it, the main purpose for the winglet on the end of the keel is the same as a winglet on the end of an airplane wing. It's not there to provide vertical lift or even horizontal lift as much, but it's there to keep water from flowing off the tip of the keel. It forces the water to flow front to back across the keel.
So is this the wing piece or is this the wing piece?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they're holding. Oh, they're at the
Yeah.
bottom of the keel.
Yes,
No, it's
it's
actually the
all the way
horizontal
back.
part that's the winglet.
Probably the theory is that they
Well, they're
reduce.
both horizontal. Jolene, you're looking at one that has a bulb and then has a wing coming off the bulb in each direction. Yes.
Okay.
My understanding is it reduces drag. It reduces turbulence, which reduces drag.
Yeah, it stops.
Yes, it
stops
keeps
the
the
vortices coming off the bottom. That's
it keeps the water from flowing downwards off the tip of the keel and creating a turbulent section and drag. Forces it to flow front to back across the keel. So it makes the keel shape more efficient. So you can get the same, you can actually get a faster boat with a shorter keel.
This keel just doesn't look right to me.
Looks like a toilet.
Bill Jarvis bought a Beneteau 36-7, and it came with a 7 or 8 foot keel, 7 or 8 foot draft keel. And he contacted the factory and said, you know, I want instead to put a 6 foot draft keel on it with winglets on it. And he drew up his design and sent it in. And Beneteau gave that design to their marine engineer to say, is this thing sound? Should we do this? And he came back and said, Yes, it will provide, if you do this to the keel, it will be shorter and it will actually make the boat faster and more stable. So that's why they started making the 36/7 shoal draft with what is now known as the Jarvis keel. I think they made the shoal draft before, but he said, I want the shoal draft, but I want winglets. And that actually made the shoal draft version of the boat a little bit faster than the deep draft version of the boat. Story for the people who know Bill Jarvis. He's a
Eric,
friend of ours from Newbern.
let's do a time check.
Okay, it's 8:20 on my computer. Did we want to talk at all about foils, or are people tired
Hillary, this is not a
about hull design?
Sorry, Jolene, what did you say? I missed that.
This picture is also not a sailboat, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
Certainly not
That one
salty.
has a retracting keel.
oh, I don't know what it is.
Everything about that boat is ugly.
Yeah. Does it even float?
It probably floats.
Yeah, well, you've got to understand why they were designed like that, because they were designed in England where you have 10-foot tides, and
Yes.
so you end up being on the mud even if you're in harbour. You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so that, okay, so you're saying that's a retractable keel.
That's a retractable keel. Yeah.
Okay.
So Eric, let's wrap it up.
You're breaking up, Jolene. I couldn't hear what you said.
Wrap it up.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions or anything else they want to talk about, or shall we call it an evening?